So before getting started, I would like to acknowledge my research team whose collective efforts made this project possible. And this is the outcome of the international collaborations across countries. And I would like to thank my funding resources from the Korean government of the National Research Foundation. So as we all know very well, the Boston naming test is most widely used standardized assessment tool to evaluate word retrieval deficits across diverse clinical populations with neurogenic communication disorders. And the BNT has been translated and or adapted into numerous languages, including Spanish, French, Dutch, Greek, Chinese, and Korean. However, it remains still unclear whether the adaptive version of the BNT differentially impact performance across diverse language users with aphasia. So among various language adaptation of the BNT, the Korean version, I would say, it's the most extreme version of the adapted one, both culturally and linguistically. Due to this extensive adaptations, the Korean version of the BNT shares only 9 items out of 60 with its original version of the BNT. So I would like to acknowledge Dr. Hyun-hee Kim for her pioneering efforts as first generation of scholars who disseminate the Korean SMP education and research in Korea. And Dr. Kim was former student of the PhD program under the supervision of the Dr. Min Neil when he was at the University of Wisconsin and later moved to the University of Pittsburgh. And he became eventually my PhD mentor when I was at Pitt. And Dr. Kim was my advisor in my master's program. And notably, Dr. Bruce Porch, who delivered a memorable reflection of aphasia assessment battery yesterday, was the mentor of my mentor. Okay, so this is the break history academic family tree to delineate how this Korean BNT came into existence. And I really have to say that it's a great honor for me as a second generation of the Korean SMP education and research in Korea to present this work, particularly at a very historically meaningful place, venue of the CAC this year. So let's move on to the fun games of the Korean BNT items. That's item number 59 in Korean BNT. Can you come up with any idea what this means or the name of the picture? Yes, wind chime, and it is a specific wind chime hanging from the roof of the temple. That's a long sentence in English, but we have one single word with 2 syllable structures. And second item, it's getting more difficult. Yes, silent. Yeah, kind of, yes, that's very close enough. So that's a conical hat, usually worn by the female Buddhist monk during the rituals in Korea. And this is also one single word with the 2 syllable structures. And this one? No idea. So this is the stone statue originating from Jeju Island, which is the biggest island in Korea. And that is sometimes regarded as guardians who protect the villages. So this is a landmark of the island. So this is the final item that I will share. Yeah, total shield with the dragon head. So this is total worship used in Joseon Dynasty during the war against the Japanese invasion of Korea in 16th century. So as you have already experienced, you can see how the Korean BNT have been widely, extensively adapted by incorporating the elements that are geographically and historically meaningful. So that made me think whether the adaptation of the Korean BNT would be actually the beneficial or detrimental for Korean speakers with aphasia. To the original BNT in terms of the structural properties and psycholinguistic variables, and we further examine how performance of the BNT differ or align between Korean and English-speaking people with aphasia. So we included 19 participants with Korean speakers with aphasia and also 19 English speakers with aphasia, and we matched for age and years of education and NPO and aphasia quotient from Ewha and English version of the BNT, the Ewha. And we administered a full battery of the BNT, which consisted of 60 items. So for the data analysis, so we examined whether there are significant differences in the lexical frequency and number of syllables between KBNT and English BNT. And we further examined whether there are significant correlations between item order and psycholinguistic properties. For performance comparisons, we examined the group differences overall BNT accuracy using the linear mix model, and also we further explored how these 60 items are grouped as clusters using K-means clustering analysis. And also we examined performance differences across the clusters using linear mixed model. And further, we correlated performance from each cluster with AQ. And finally, using lasso regression, we tried to identify which cluster is the best predictor associated with AQ. So the results. So there were not significant differences in terms of the local lexical frequency between the KBNT and English BNT. However, we found significant differences in the number of syllables. So Korean BNT elicited significantly higher number of the syllables compared to those in English version. So as you can see, as the item number order increases, the lexical frequency decreases across the board. However, the number of syllables didn't come into play. So let's move on to the performance comparisons. So as you can see, in the overall accuracy, we did not find any significant differences between Korean speakers with aphasia and also English speakers with aphasia. And as you can confirm here again, as the item order increases, the accuracy systematically decreases. Okay, so for the clustering analysis, so to examine how the 16 items are clustered in each version of the BNT, we explored using K-means clustering analysis and Bayes-Means S score for each BNT item per version. We are pretty much confident that we can just go with the number 3. So we identified 3 clusters per Korean BNT and English BNT, and if you can see the cluster left side upper panel, the yellow one, those are the items that are very Korean specific and culturally salient, and those are the items that we practice together. So that makes me think through why this comes out and what this means. So we further examined whether there are any significant differences in accuracy, low frequency, and number of syllables in item order for each BNT version depending on the cluster. And as you can see, that as the cluster number increases, the accuracy and low frequency systematically decreases and item order increases. So in both BNT versions. So we can say that probably these clusters are grouped together based on the item difficulty of the BNT. However, what does that mean? And that makes me just dig into more data. So we explored whether there are between group differences for each cluster. And for the cluster number 1, which is the easiest one, we didn't find any group differences. However, for cluster number 2 and 3, the Korean speakers with aphasia perform worse than English speakers with aphasia, even after we control over low frequency and number of syllables in the linear mix model. Okay, so what does tell us more about? So we scrutinized the data more and more, and we correlated the performance from each cluster with the AQ. And interestingly, for Korean speakers, we did not find any significant correlations between the cluster 1 and AQ. However, cluster 2 and 3 were significantly correlated with the AQ for Korean speakers. However, in contrast, for English speakers, all the clusters' performance were correlated with AQ across the board. So the final analysis. So we used the lasso regressions to identify whether there is any specific cluster that yielded the highest predictors or the coefficient with AQ. And interestingly enough, again the cluster 3 from the Korean BNT yielded the highest coefficient with AQ for Korean speakers, and cluster 2 from the English BNT exhibited the strongest coefficient. So to discuss, we can say the overall structural property of the KBNT and English BNT were comparable. However, we found that there are significant differences in number of syllables, but not in low frequency, and these differences likely reflect the nature of the syllabic languages like Korean, so which generally have longer syllabic structures compared to the alphabetical. So Korean is alphabetical and as well as syllabic. So this is the example for English word escalator, that's 4 syllables. For Korean, we have, when it gets into phonetically representation, it came to 6. Okay, for the performance comparisons, there were not overall differences in terms of the item level accuracy between the two groups of aphasia. However, as I emphasized, the KBNT cluster 3 contained culturally salient items with no direct English equivalents. That cluster was most strongly linked to aphasia severity for Korean speakers with aphasia. So these findings highlight the importance of interpreting culturally adapted standardized tests with caution, particularly when we work with bilingual participants with aphasia. So, and also it is essential to consider cultural and linguistic exposure when assessing lexical-semantic access, especially using confrontation naming paradigm for evaluating people with aphasia. So what's next? So we are expanding the BNT project by collaborating and include the research team. As many of you may be already aware of the INCLUDE, that's the International Network for the Cross-Linguistic Research on Brain Health, which is led by UCSF team, and we now included more diverse languages, such as French, and 3 different versions of the BNT. There was surprisingly, and one Spanish in Spain, and the other one is Latin America, and the BNT version of the Spanish version used in US, as well as Korean and English. So, Swati and I are co-editing the special issue in Aphasiology on cross-linguistic and multicultural perspectives on assessment and treatment for neurogenic communication disorders, and announcement has not been posted in Aphasiology yet. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Swati. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for the wonderful talk. Just again, as a reminder, please introduce yourself with your name and your institution when you come up to the microphone.
I'm wondering if you have thought about or if you have looked at the response to the different kinds of cues that we provide in the English BNT versus the Korean BNT. Is that something you're thinking about? Kind of a broad question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So definitely we do have data, but we haven't looked at the semantic and phonological cue to analyze the accuracy yet. But definitely, like as a quantitative analysis, as future directions, we can think about analyzing how they perform or respond to people depending on the cues.
I also just wondered how you developed the semantic cues or the stimulus cues for the Korean adaptation.
Yes, so it's already specified in the manual of the KBNT developed by Dr. Kim. So I think, I don't know history exactly where this semantic feature came from, but sometimes I can think about the items that are not, sometimes it's, there is a generation differences for some of the items that we, shared. So I think it's probably we have to think about, with Dr. Kim, how to update the norm in items. Thank you.
Hi, García, Temple University. I really enjoyed your presentation, thank you. I was wondering, and I feel slightly bratty, but I wondered if you've done a similar analysis for the Korean version of the WAB and how that might relate to the correlations with WAB AQ.
Yeah, that's very fun questions. And you remember that we have a paper that we are working together. So there is a specific subtest of the commands, serial commands. And interestingly, the KWAB is not widely adapted. As you can see, the sentence structures. Well, the sentence structure is different, but the items of the sentences are pretty much the semantic units are pretty much the same. So I don't know why the KWAB is not really widely adapted, but the lexicosemantic, like components of the tasks has been adapted, and I think it's going to be a really fun project as well to compare the KWAB.
I'm just curious how you think that might affect the correlations then. Like, does that affect how you interpret the strength of the correlations of the K? I'm just trying to think through it.
Yeah. So honestly, I don't have thoughts on that question yet. However, I can think about what we can do with it and how the correlations will turn out. But the thing is that, yes, so your question is more, associated with how to evaluate people with aphasia using different languages based on the same metric. So I think that's the question, the big question in our clinical field, because as Will presented in his talk, like using different items, people looks like perform worse on this test but better on the other, but we cannot say that Korean speakers are more impaired than English speakers because they score lower in the BNP of the Korean version, because it's the plus 10, 2, and 3 are the worst as we can observe. So that's the biggest question that we have to think through.